As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and a lot of questions have surfaced on social media and on the mainstream media about Governor Ron DeSantis' role in the potential possible indictment of former President Donald Trump. Does he have a role at all, legally speaking, as the governor of Florida? Well, my good friend Josh Hammer, who is the Newsweek opinion columnist, he also has a great show, the Josh Hammer Show, that you can listen to. He posted this on Twitter yesterday. Quote, a lot of people are offering a lot of silly opinions right now on interstate renditions. Governors have a perfunctory administrative role in this, not a discretionary one. Shall on demand, the language of course, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution, is not a discretionary one. And he said, shall on demand does not leave room for subjective ambiguity. So why are a lot of these hardcore Trump supporters wanting to paint Ron DeSantis into a corner and suggesting that he needs to stand up for his resident in Florida and stand up for freedom and get involved? Well, I'm going to break it all down with Josh Hammer, who is a brilliant legal mind. We're going to talk about the law and the politics coming up right after this. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. And joining me now, good friend of the show and one of the brilliant legal minds out there, is Josh Hammer. He is the Newsweek opinion editor and also the host of the Josh Hammer Show, which is another great podcast. So Josh, this whole kind of fight that I see the kind of MAGA world trying to drag Ron DeSantis into this, what I see between a rock and a hard place, of basically suggesting that he has some kind of power and authority in Florida to make a determination on this indictment just because Donald Trump is a resident of Florida. You've made the argument otherwise. So unpack that a little bit for us.
So, Jenna, this issue kind of goes back to the early American Republic. If you kind of read up on your American history, I mean, famously, we had the Articles of Confederation that failed, and you had the Federalist Papers that were arguing to ratify the U.S. Constitution, and then you had the anti-federalists who basically said, no, the national government will be too strong and too powerful. This particular issue of fugitives from justice, and specifically that's really what we're talking about here, of fugitives from justice who escape one state's jurisdiction to another, and whether the state where that fugitive is wanted for a crime can be forcibly repatriated to that state. This was literally one of the issues that was kind of a hot topic between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And, again, to kind of go back to kind of Americana constitutionalism 101, the states created the federal government, of course, not the other way around. And America obviously highly values state sovereignty. So all of that is to say that the framers of the Constitution, when they went to write this down, were very deliberate. They were very explicit about the fact that someone could not simply escape justice by means of escaping from one state to the other. So, they were very clear. And, I'm here on the road right now. I'm in Austin, Texas. I'm speaking today for the University of Texas School of Law's Federal Society chapter. So I have my little pocket constitution handy. So, let's go ahead and just read the relevant clause, if you don't mind, Jenna. So
Yeah,
Article 4, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 2. This is the extradition clause, or the interstate renditions clause, depending on how you want to phrase it. So Article 4, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution reads, quote, "A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime who shall flee from justice and be found in another state shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime." So there's two things that I want to very immediately flag here. First of all, the only time that this clause is even operative is when you have someone who is, quote, fleeing from justice, i.e. an actual fugitive, someone who is trying to escape, facing up to a possible indictment or a charge. As the case may be here, that's simply not applicable because the former president, Donald Trump, has said that he will happily surrender. So that renders this whole clause from the outset, frankly, not operative. But even if you want to hold that aside, the term, quote, "shall on demand of the executive authority." Well, the word shall, Jenny, you're a lawyer. The word shall has a very specific legal meaning. Once upon a time, conservatives were in unanimous agreement as to what, quote unquote, "shall not be infringed" means, for example, in the Second Amendment. Shall is a direct, explicit imperative. So there's really no room for ambiguity here. But again, that shouldn't be a surprise because, like I said, this is one of the conditions upon which the states agreed to ratify the national government going back to the 1780s.
Yeah, and that's a very clear explanation of the relevant, or maybe not even operative, as you explained, provisions of the law when you have someone, and here Donald Trump clearly isn't a fugitive, at least currently. He simply moved from one state to another prior to any sort of suspicion of indictment. This has been going on and has been declined by the former sitting AG, Cyrus Vance, to not be prosecuted. Then the feds, the DOJ, declined to prosecute this. This is a legal pretzel that Alvin Bragg is trying to manipulate himself into. But, all of those things aside, and for listeners, I did an entire podcast on that substantively yesterday. So speaking just on the merit here of these, I think these people who really don't read the law, they don't necessarily understand that Ron DeSantis here doesn't have any sort of authority just because Donald Trump happened to move his residency to Florida. And his own lawyers are already saying, and have said even last week, that if an indictment is returned, then he will happily go and show up for an arraignment. That's the typical process in these types of things where you don't have a warrantless arrest or someone who's just apprehended on the scene. You have an indictment that's returned. And so then, generally speaking, especially if you're already represented by legal counsel, then typically DA's offices or even the feds will give the person time to turn themselves in or just show up at the arraignment for a bond consideration hearing without even undergoing arrest. So what do you make then of the motivations, or maybe it's just total ignorance of people that are suggesting that they want Ron DeSantis to get involved because freedom matters and, do something?
So let me just say at the outset, I know you spent a lot of time covering this, but let me just briefly clarify that I think this prosecution by Alvin Bragg is disgusting, despicable, is without any basis whatsoever, completely meritless. It is literally the worst possible example of the old Stalinist tactic. Joseph Stalin's, one of his top lawyers famously said, "Show me the man and I will show you the crime." That is exactly what is going on here. It is an utter and absolute farce. But having said that, my read, my own kind of personal read, just trying to see what I'm seeing from the former president, from some of his inner circle, it seems to me that President Trump is not necessarily looking to avoid this indictment. On the contrary, I think there's a decent element that he actually wants it. Because, if there's one thing that President Trump wants, he loves kind of being the center of attention. And in particular, I think when it comes to kind of his political aspirations for kind of reascending to the White House in 2024, he loves trying to be kind of the victim, he is most comfortable in the role of victim, in the role of martyr. It's an easy way for him to kind of rally his base. You kind of have that whole rally around the flag effect. I said something very similar actually last August after the raid in Mar-a-Lago for the classified documents, which I also said was outrageous, was a crossing of the Rubicon, something that Merrick Garland absolutely should never, ever have done. I thought that was also similarly disgusting. But, these disgusting tactics aside, and just holding aside the idea that the ruling class clearly despises Trump with all they've got, which is so patently obvious, I do think that Trump kind of relishes the role of victim. So having said that, again, like you said, he has shown no indication whatsoever of trying to put up a fight. On the contrary, if I'm not mistaken, he has said that he will happily fly up to Manhattan, to New York County, New York. He will kind of enter his charge in kind. So none of this is particularly complicated. It's actually very straightforward. And I think the fact that many the blue check Twitterati, who are kind of some of the loudest kind of Trump 2024 talking heads out there, the fact that they are trying to kind of redirect the conversation so quickly to Governor DeSantis is odd at best, is possibly desperate at worst. But it's a very peculiar tactic, again, because Trump himself, as I explained, he is taking this whole argument out of play he's not a fugitive from justice. He is not fleeing justice in New York State. He is, if anything, eager. He is literally eager to go face justice in New York State because, again, it helps him play the victim card and it probably helps his political aspirations. So this whole thing is a kind of a bizarre bait and switch, to be honest with you. I think it's a very odd tactic. And again, just to kind of clarify here, let's say, just hypothetically, let's say that Donald Trump actually was trying to flee from justice. Let's say that he actually was a fugitive from justice. But even in that case, no matter how despicable, disgusting, politically motivated, weaponized, whatever you want to call it, this Alvin Bragg prosecution is, and I do believe on the substantive merits that it is all of those things. But even in that case, if Trump actually was fleeing, again, it's not like the governor, in this case, Governor DeSantis, it's not like he would have any kind of room for discretion here. I mean, that was kind of the whole point of why I emphasized the shall on demand clause. Shall, again, has a very clear legal meaning. The Supreme Court affirmed that in a 1987 case called Puerto Rico versus Branstad. To my knowledge, it was the last time that the original meaning of the extradition clause was straightforwardly presented to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they ruled in unanimous fashion. Actually, there were no dissenters to this ruling. There were a couple of concurrences, but there were no actual dissenters, including some conservative stalwarts like Scalia, Rehnquist. None of them even dissented, and they all affirmed the idea that shall on demand has such a clear ruling that even in the context of a fugitive trying to flee from justice, if a governor, if a legislature, if a state tried to preclude, someone from being returned to the jurisdiction to face a crime, then a federal court could issue a writ of mandamus requiring the governor to then extradite. So textually, this is very clear. And politically, what's going on here is it's a really just bizarre bait and switch and a way to try to score some cheap shots against a presumptive rival for 2024, I suppose.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I mean, the text that does say shall, it doesn't say may or upon a showing of the merits or anything that would be in any way discretionary or provide a hearing or, a possible showing in front of either a judicial officer or in the mind of a sitting governor. I mean, there's literally no discretion here. Shall means you have no choice, essentially. Right. And so, Josh, but what I'm seeing though, and I think you're right in terms of President Trump liking to be the man in the arena. He posts that, through a lot of surrogates all the time. He likes to be the one who is standing up to these kind of false and faulty persecutions and being the one who is who's taking on all of these absurd and insane Democrat leftist tactics. And so in that sense, I think you're right that the campaign, at least, is seeing this as an opportunity not only to fundraise, but to get him a jump in the polls. And what I found really interesting about this call over the weekend from the Trump base, and some of the Twitterati that you mentioned that are, whether they're paid or they're just on Team Trump, that are calling for DeSantis to respond. He ultimately did respond, but he didn't jump into the media circus. He didn't go out there trying to get news interviews saying, well, I'm the governor of Florida and this is a resident of my state and here's my opinion on it. He continued doing the business of Florida. He waited until a question was presented at a news conference and then he responded. And he didn't even try to pivot away from it. He responded directly for several minutes. He completely slammed the DA, Alvin Bragg, is a Soros-funded prosecutor who reminded people that he's the only governor that's actually taken action in his own state to protect against the Soros-funded prosecutors. And what I found so interesting about the Trump camp's response to that was instead of saying, even just leaving it alone or saying, well, took you long enough, DeSantis, or maybe some of those cheap shots, they actually started trying to call him out, saying that it wasn't good enough. And in the midst of this so-called call for Ron DeSantis to get engaged, because this is, the biggest miscarriage of justice ever. And again, I agree with you. It is a miscarriage of justice. But if that's their emphasis, Donald Trump took to Truth Social, not talking about the indictment, but just trying to call out Ron DeSantis with nicknames, with, saying things as, in my opinion, really low and petty as trying to say that, maybe he's possibly gay. I mean, some of these things that were just really uncalled for. So if you have somebody who's saying this is the biggest, miscarriage of justice ever, we want the governor to weigh in on it, and then their response is to focus on him, that tells me that maybe Donald Trump is more concerned about DeSantis entering the race than he even is about the indictment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Jenna. It's very well reasoned and it's well said. I mean, look, Trump world is obviously very scared of the possible candidacy of Ron DeSantis. I mean, why else would Trump, going back to even before his reelection? I mean, I think it was the Saturday night before election day in November, where he first kind of whipped out the Ron DeSanctimonious nickname, if I remember correctly. It was literally before he was elected. And I mean, to me, that was kind of a blowaway, frankly. I mean, it was a Saturday evening, so it was 3 days before Tuesday, where the Republican governor of Florida, the state where Trump resides, was on the ballot against Charlie Crist, and he was trying to throw him under the bus. The whole thing was weird. But there was no reason why you do that and why you continue to do this against someone who is quite literally not in the race unless you're possibly scared. So, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And the fact that they're already kind of trying to kind of redirect attention, frankly, away from Alvin Bragg, frankly, away from Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, the hush money from all of that stuff. The fact that all they want to talk about is DeSantis, I think, kind of indicates, to your point, that they see this as a political opportunity to kind of just try to undermine a presumptive rival. But, two things cannot be true at once, right? I mean, this cannot be the greatest miscarriage of justice ever. And just to clarify one more time, I feel like a broken record, but it is politically motivated, is weaponized, is frivolous, and just real quick on that, actually, my very liberal grandfather kind of visited me for brunch this past Sunday down in Florida, where we both live. And he's a partisan Democrat. And even my grandfather, who was a lawyer, he told me, he said, this is garbage, like absolute garbage. So, when he and I agree on a legal issue, we're probably right. But two things cannot be true at once. This cannot be kind of a great miscarriage of justice. And on the other hand, Trump cannot be talking about kind of, gleefully, kind of willfully surrender. I mean, right? I mean, if it's actually kind of that bad, if it is that debilitating, then why is he reacting that way too? So none of the pieces really fit here together. There's a lot of kind of, I think, intellectual tension between the various elements of his reaction. But if there is one common denominator, if there is one thing in common, I think it is exactly what you just said, which is that he, and I think a lot of his kind of staunchest and most vocal allies, see this as a golden opportunity to throw Governor DeSantis under the bus. But again, it's curious, because if they really wanted to do that, they probably should try to paint themselves as actually trying to escape the indictment and trying to flee justice to possibly implicate Article 4, Section 2, Clause 2. But they can't do that because Trump also just has this competing, insatiable desire to be the perpetual victim and the martyr. So those two things are in kind of direct tension here, actually. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I've said as well, I mean, as soon as this whole narrative first arose from the Truth Social post that that Donald Trump made on Saturday night, saying, "I'm probably getting arrested on Thursday or on Tuesday," and kind of dominating the media. A couple of things happened. First, he did dominate the media. He's still dominating the media with this story, which is where he likes to be. And also, the campaign headed into 2024 does have some fundraising issues. And I think that that is a motivation from the Manhattan DA, just like all of these other witch hunts and these ridiculous malicious prosecutions, to simply drain the war chest of Donald Trump. And so I think he may be looking at this as a strategic advantage to fundraise more from his base, and to say, you need to help me because I'm fighting, against the crazy out of control Democrats and some of these things, when he's losing some of those donors. But what did you make of Ron DeSantis's remarks when he actually did address this yesterday in a press conference? Because a lot of people who, not necessarily loyal to Trump, and they haven't come out openly for DeSantis, have said that his comment about, well, I don't really know what goes into paying a porn star hush money, was not necessarily the wisest, because he could have looked like even more of a statesman if he didn't take that jab. I find it kind of ironic that people will totally be like, well, Trump is Trump, DeSanctimonious, whatever. But then DeSantis says one thing that could possibly be perceived as a jab, and then he gets slammed for it. But do you think that there's any merit in suggesting that maybe he could have been even more statesman-like and just kept this above that level completely?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. So I saw that clip yesterday, and I'll be very honest with you. I snickered. I kind of laughed. I mean, it was somewhat of a funny line. I mean, there is a, there is a role for humor in politics. There's even a role for snark in politics. And, in the case of Governor DeSantis, Trump's been piling on him, I mean, for months and months now, and we're all human beings. At some point, you're going to have kind of an impromptu moment where you say something. Now, having said all that, and again, the fact, just admitting openly the fact that I openly kind of snickered and laughed at that, 'cause I thought it was kind of funny. Holding all that aside, if I were talking to Governor DeSantis one-on-one, and if I were advising him, and he obviously has not declared for the presidential race, but, assuming that he does, which I do predict he will, if I were advising him directly, what I would say to him is basically the following. I would say, look, I don't think that trying to run against Trump in 2024 as a Trump rival, the kind of the way that a Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and so forth tried to do in 2016, I don't think that is going to work. I think that the only way to potentially defeat Donald Trump in a 2024 Republican presidential primary would be to run as the logical heir, as the logical successor, and basically say, thank you, Mr. President. You have founded this movement. You have kind of reinvigorated the Republican Party and conservative America with a sense of reality, nationalism, and more populist hue. All of this is salutary. Thank you so much for all you have done. But now it's time to kind of pass the torch to someone who is over 3 decades younger. That is the basic kind of very delicate threading of the needle that I think Governor DeSantis would have to thread if he indeed runs for president in 2024. It's difficult. It's a very kind of narrow kind of Venn diagram overlap. It might not even be doable, but that is, I think, what he would have to do if he runs for president. And to your point, Jenna, I'm not sure that snarky comments like this, no matter how funny they may be, no matter how much I may have privately laughed in my hotel room when I saw it, I'm not sure it's helpful, frankly, to that cause. So I do think that there's something to be said for that. Yes.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, and I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not DeSantis changes his strategy, changes some of his rhetoric, and even pulls back further. I mean, so far, he really hasn't engaged Trump at all, other than that kind of snarky comment. He didn't even mention Trump's name yesterday. He's kind of been above the fray and above the turbulence in some ways that he's not going to necessarily be able to do if and when he does actually become a candidate rival. But at the same time, I think you're right that he can try to take a different path and different tactic against Donald Trump than the rivals in 2016, and maybe learn from some of those things and some of the unfortunate missteps of Cruz and Rubio and some of those. But in just the last couple of minutes I have with you, Josh, one last legal question as well. So speaking of this kind of head-to-head, the Trump camp also filed an ethics violation in the state of Florida against DeSantis, which if I were advising Trump and I haven't worked for him in 2 years, I would not have advised that. I think it looks very petty. It looks like he's trying to do anything he possibly can to keep DeSantis from entering the race. But is there any legal merit aside from the obvious optics in saying that a sitting Florida elected official can't really run a shadow campaign?
No, I mean, the short answer is no. I mean, first of all, I mean, like, how do you possibly even litigate that? I mean, how could you possibly kind of get that before a jury, before a judge? I mean, you're trying to kind of suss out some sort of kind of nefarious kind of subjective intent. I mean, the whole thing is not justiciable. I mean, to kind of use an analogy from constitutional law doctrine, it's kind of political question doctrine. I mean, you know, this probably would be, it's just totally irrelevant. I mean, look, I mean, the governor of Florida is allowed to write a book, which he just did. And when a notable political figure or anyone writes a book, you are allowed to kind of promote the book however you want. I mean, I haven't written a book yet. I hope to do so soon. But to me, that's kind of part of the appeal of writing a book is you go around, you meet new people, you get to kind of make your arguments to kind of fresh audiences. It's half the appeal, right? So, no, it's totally nonsensical. I read a couple of short articles about it, and no, I mean, there's just no chance that that's going to go anywhere. But again, to your point, and to kind of to like the recurring theme of this whole conversation, you know, the fact that I think it was like a PAC, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was kind of a pro-Trump super PAC. The fact that they felt compelled to file this ethics complaint in Tallahassee does bespeak a certain level of desperation. And, you know, Trump and everyone kind of very close to him clearly recognizes that Governor DeSantis, if he runs, will be the top rival. And they're really trying to do whatever they can to knock him out. But, you know, unfortunately for them, I mean, he's got an incredibly compelling substantive track record as governor of Florida. And as far as I'm aware, a fairly squeaky clean, kind of track record as a father and a husband as well. Some very kind of sordid and wholly ungrounded rumors notwithstanding. So it's going to be hard to kind of, I think, dredge up the Ron DeSantis is evil sort of thing. But, you know, this ethics complaint is definitely not going to go anywhere, to your question.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it does show kind of the 2016 version of Trump going and attacking people directly. I mean, we saw, you know, what he did to Ted Cruz's wife, and, you know, he's kind of running that same playbook, and it worked for him in 2016. But I think that Ron DeSantis is a man of different mettle. He's going to take the lessons learned from 2016, is going to meet those types of attacks very differently. And it kind of remains to be seen. So, you know, I really don't think that a lot of the Twitterati that are treating this like 2016 recognize that the country has been through, you know, 6 years of a lot of this. And a lot of people are just very tired of that kind of rhetoric. And I don't think that will play very well. So we'll see, though, how DeSantis chooses to respond to this, and, you know, see how they both enter the race if and when DeSantis does enter, which I agree with you. I think that he will. But I do think that, you know, this is Donald Trump's nomination to lose. And so he's going to have to look at it and come at it from a perspective of being truly an incumbent, which I find it interesting that he's not really running yet that type of campaign with these kinds of comments against DeSantis. But overall, Josh, really appreciate your legal expertise, because, you know, we definitely want to dispel some of those legal myths, regardless of what people think about the political optics of everything else, which of course is totally subjective to the voter's opinion. And that's why we have campaigns. But always really appreciate it. Where can people find your show? And always read your Newsweek opinion articles and everything that you push out, because you're a great writer. And so I would really commend all of Josh's writing. You can follow him on Twitter as well.
Yeah, Jen, always a pleasure. I appreciate it very much. So I'm on Twitter, Josh_Hammer. My syndicated column goes out to a lot of different outlets, including Newsweek, and my podcast, The Josh Hammer Show, is on Apple, Spotify, and platforms like that. And Jen, it's really been a great conversation.
Thanks, Josh. Always appreciate it. Well, friends, you must start taking care of your liver now more than ever. Why? Well, because the latest data from the American Heart Association indicates that adults with fatty liver were 3.5 times more likely to have heart failure than those without. The American Liver Foundation says that 100 million Americans have fatty liver, which means many people are still at risk. We throw everything at our livers: cholesterol, alcohol, toxins, Tylenol, statins, cigarettes, you name it. That's why so many of us have a sluggish, fatty liver that makes us gain weight and lose energy. For decades now, your liver has helped you with over 500 key functions every day. So it's time to help your liver and give back. Here's the solution: Liver Health Formula, an all-natural supplement which contains 12 clinically proven biobotanicals that help recharge and protect your liver. Manufactured right here in the USA and approved by American doctors. You can try Liver Health Formula and receive 5 free gifts when you order today. First, you'll receive a free bottle of nano-powered omega-3 to keep your heart healthy. You will also get 4 free ebooks to support every aspect of your health. So try Liver Health Formula today by going to getliverhelp.com/Jenna and claim your 5 free bonus gifts. So that's getliverhelp.com/JENNA. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook. You need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.